now we are coming into another area and also tail end of our discussion today. So you have also expressed your opposition to the privatization of Ceylon Electricity Board in particular. I would like to know, is there a particular reason to oppose the CEB privatization, or are you broadly opposed to the privatization of the state-owned enterprise as a whole?
No, so the starting point is I'm not opposed to privatization per se. I am opposed to privatizations which drive up the core costs of production in an economy. So if one can say that the privatization is going to improve the efficiency of that particular entity and the provision of those particular services, I have no problem with that privatization. The problem is that there are some industries which are what we call natural monopolies. Energy is one of those. It's a natural monopoly. Let me just give an example. In the United States, in California, they decided to privatize energy and they set up 6 energy companies. One of those is the famous Enron. And they had a regulator who was supposed to make sure that there was no collusion between the energy companies, and certainly no energy company would be taking over the others and becoming a de facto monopoly in the sector. Well, what we know Enron did is they not only took over the other energy companies, but they bribed the regulators to turn a blind eye. And then we had the absurd situation in the United States of power cuts in California, the richest part of the world. So the first time in history that the richest part of the world has power cuts. And that is because we allow what is a natural monopoly to be controlled by a private entity. Now, if you look at the East Asians, maybe they don't have, in all the countries, government running the energy companies, but they have very strict regulation and lots of subsidies to those particular industries. And the manifestation of that was when we had the energy crisis globally, where we mentioned Sri Lanka had this very high inflation. Part of that high inflation was the higher energy prices. But we noticed that in East Asia, unlike even Europe and the United States, energy prices didn't rise very much because the subsidies kicked in, or the nationalized energy companies were allowed to run huge losses for that particular time because they realized energy prices would come down again and they didn't want to disrupt the costs of production for the producers in those countries. Now, companies in Europe in particular, I know for a fact, have been looking very closely at Asia, for relocating to Asia, primarily because of the massive disruption they faced with the high energy prices. And the great example that is given nowadays is BASF, the huge chemical giant of Germany, that has now told the German government officially that they're relocating. And actually, the rumor is they're relocating to China. But they have said quite explicitly the problem is that they cannot rely on stable energy prices in Europe any longer.
Right. I think a very important thing to ponder going forward, because we are also in the process of privatizing even some of the strategically important state-owned enterprises as well. I mean, it's quite clear from Dr. Howard's explanation why he has particularly singled out energy behemoth like Ceylon Electricity Board, and why he explained the significance of why you need to retain it under the government control. And we even saw the recent examples in Europe as well, when they were faced with the energy crisis at the onset or the initial days of the Ukraine war, where there was a case or two in France and perhaps in Germany. They nationalized one or couple of their energy companies. That is one of the most recent. So this is in Europe.
I should add just there, Elena, that it doesn't mean to say that there isn't an argument for restructuring the CB. Because if there are inefficiencies, and they're proven inefficiencies, I think it has to be restructured, because energy prices are so fundamental to cost of production. And one cannot allow those sorts of inefficiencies to remain in that sector. So if there is that case, and I think many have made that case, then one shouldn't take that as a justification for privatization, but rather for the restructuring of that sector.
Right. I don't think anybody disagrees that these institutions, including the CEB, must be restructured to eliminate their inefficiencies. But when it comes to privatization, in other words, using privatization as the only means of restructuring, I think then that is something you need to think about.